Hey guys, Waterfowler41 here, and in today's video we're going to be diving into the first of what I think might be several other stereo upgrades, but we'll keep it very simple in this one. We're going to be adding an aftermarket subwoofer to my factory 2023 Raptor. So enter a company called Sounds Good Stereo. So what they specialize in is creating turnkey plug-and-play kits that fit in a lot of these upper model pickup trucks. And really the whole theory behind all the kits that they offer is it's almost very much a plug and play install. Obviously there's a little bit of cutting here and there, especially when you got to fit aftermarket boxes, but for the most part, from a wiring standpoint, everything's unplug factory harnesses, plug in their integration harnesses, and then rock and roll with everything. So they have everything from super mild kits, which is what we're installing today, just a subwoofer and a single channel amp, all the way up to the absolutely wild kits, which is a completely revamp of your whole stereo system. My kit, subwoofers and amp. It comes with a custom-made ported subwoofer box created by the 1087 design crew. I think that's their internal design team at Sounds Good. Already set up with two 6.5-inch subwoofers, and then we get an amp rack that's cut to fit, bolt right into the factory amp location on the 2023 Raptors with a single channel amp already set up on it, all the wiring already run, as well as our factory integration harness. So along with the subwoofer, the box, the amp, and the amp rack, you also get your peripheral equipment to make the magic happen here. So you get your power and ground wires that are sized appropriately for the size amp, that are cut so you can run them all the way up to your battery, so you can get a nice good ground and you can get a good power feed there. And then you obviously get some tools here. So you get some metal pry tool as well as some flush mount little wire snippers here, just to make everything in your whole life a lot easier. The attention to detail in this kit is amazing, and I'll give you a really good example. So this is the bottom bracket for the amp rack. And when you install the amp rack, it's going to bolt to a factory bolt up here. And then there's this bracket here that's going to slip on the bottom. But if you look at the bracket, everything is, the detail on this is awesome. The cuts are perfect. It's flush mounted. So when you mount it to these screws that are on the plate, it's going to look great once it's installed in the truck. Unfortunately, the seats are going to be up, so you won't see it. But just the attention to detail is why kits like this do really well in trucks like this. Gone are the days where you could just throw an RCA converter on there, get some speaker level outputs, throw in an amp, throw in a subwoofer, and expect things to work fine. We're going to dive into the truck in a minute. Let me get all lighting set up and walk through this installation. But again, this should take you maybe 3-4 hours at most. Everything's plug and play. Take your time. You're going to be removing some plastic panels. Make sure you use the tools that came in the kit just to make life easier. But let's get inside the truck and we'll start walking through the installation. All right, so the beauty of this subwoofer installation is the seats themselves do not need to come out of the vehicle. The only thing we need to do is fold down the seat backs. Now the passenger side already has a little bit of a strap that you pull and it pops the seat down. That way you can get to the car jack. But on the driver's side, you need to use a box wrench like this, and there's a clip on the back side of the seat that I showed you in my seat cover video that you need to pull up on in order to get the back to fold down. So the easiest way to do that is fold up the bottom portion of the seat. That way the back seat raises up, but it lifts off the back cab wall a little bit. Then you'll get enough room to slide your wrench in there, get it on the key, and pop things up. Let me go ahead and pop it off, and then I'll show you what you're prying. All right, so we got the seat down. This is that clip that you're prying on. So if you look right here, there's a silver little, I guess, rod. All you're doing is connecting your box wrench on there and pulling it up, and it'll disengage this clip, which releases that factory seat from the wall. Now, the next thing we need to do is go over to the driver's side or passenger side, fold down that seat, and then we're going to talk through what we're going to be removing. But let's get inside the truck after we get that seat down, and I'll talk through what we're removing as well as the tools that we need. All right, so we got both seats down. Let's take a look at everything. I'll orient you to what everything is, and then I'll walk through what we're going to be removing. So starting from the driver's side, and we'll move over to the passenger side. Right here, this is your factory amp as well as your factory amp rack. We're going to remove the factory amp. We're going to remove the rack as well. And then we're going to install the factory amp onto the new amp rack from 1087, so it'll live right next to our new single channel amp. So basically, all of these plugs need to be unplugged, and then this equipment needs to be unbolted. We'll get to that in a second. Here's your subwoofer. This is the oval, so this is the Bang & Olufsen Unleashed system. They call it the racetrack subwoofer as well. This is going to need to be removed, so we're going to unplug it and unbolt it. That guy's done. We don't need him anymore. Then we have our car jack over here. This is also going to need to be removed from the truck. Now, all of this kit that we're going to be installing is plug and play, and it's going to take up the entirety of this back wall here. So what that means is we need to find a new home for this guy. Let's go get some tools, and we'll start with removing the amp. We'll get the subwoofer out of there, we'll get the car jack out of here, and then once we get all this hardware out, then we can focus on removing these C-pillars, because those need to come off on both sides, and then we're gonna have to pull off this fiberboard here, because we're gonna have to modify that a bit to fit the new subwoofer. All right, so important to note, in this install video, we're only installing new subwoofers. We are not doing anything to the factory speakers yet. So what that means is we're gonna reuse the factory amplifier. So we're not replacing it. All we're doing is tying into this factory amplifier so we can get that signal over to the new amplifier and then power our subwoofers on that. So that's key, because some of the other kits that Sounds Good sells, you replace the entire amplifier with a new system. This is not a kit that we're gonna be doing that. So anyway, first thing we're gonna do is remove the amplifier so we can get it off of this backing here. There's Torx T25 bits here, and then there's a couple 10mm bolts on the bottom. After we unplug the amplifier and undo these bolts, this whole amplifier and rack should pull out, and then we can remove the amplifier off the rack and get it relocated to our new rack. But let's go ahead and get this guy out, unplugged, and then we can focus on removing our subwoofer. All right, so after you unbolt everything, so it's just the two Torx T25 guys up on the top, it's two 10mm bolts on the bottom, and keep that hardware out because we're gonna utilize those two mounting points when we go in with our new amp rack. The other thing you need to do is use that pry tool that came in the kit and pry off these plastic clips. These guys are thick mamas, so having the metal pry tool with a little bit of backbone to it will certainly help with getting these wire harnesses off of here. So once you get these harnesses off here, this whole guy just pulls right out, and there's nothing to that system. Like I said, we're gonna remove this amp off of this rack and we're gonna reinstall it on the 1087 one. All right, now that we got our amplifier and rack out of the way, all the plugs are tucked away to the side so we don't snag on those, we're gonna turn our attention to the subwoofer. Very easy, it's three 13mm nuts and bolts. So you got a bolt up here at the top, and then you got a 13mm nut here on the stud, and then another one on the other side. Go ahead and unplug the subwoofer and then use your trim tool to remove this push clip from the side of the subwoofer, and this fella will pop straight out. Once we get this guy out of the way, I want to show you an opening that's going to be left behind the subwoofer, as well as a part that comes in the Sounds Good kit that we're going to install later on in the installation, so we make sure we have a nice soundproof wall. All right, so once you remove the subwoofer, you're going to see there's a giant hole that's left over. The subwoofer on the B&O system uses this opening and uses the volume through that opening to act as a subwoofer. I don't know the correct name for it, but that's how that subwoofer functions. Our new subwoofers are totally enclosed in their box. It's a ported box, but they rely on the box itself for the volume and for their dynamic nature, so we don't need that opening anymore. So in the kit from Sounds Good Stereo, you get this little block off plate. After we sound deaden this wall, you go ahead and install this guy right there, and there's some supplied hardware that comes in the kit. We're going to do this later on in the kit. Let's keep moving forward. We got to remove that car jack now. And then after we remove the car jack, we're going to go with each of the C-pillars and remove these guys and get them out of the way. All right, we're on the passenger side. Passenger side seat's pulled down. Again, this one's a lot easier, has its own strap. So the first thing we need to do is just pull the jack out of its own mount. This is an asininely long bolt, but we're going to undo this bolt. Once we get the jack out of here, I'll show you the bracket. We're going to have to remove the bracket as well. So this whole thing comes out. Now, I do, in the bed of my truck, have the built-right rail system. Let's see if I could put the lights on here. And you can see it's right over there. I think I'm going to figure out a way to relocate the car jack to that. But that's another project down the road. We're installing the subwoofer, so I'll just throw the jack in the back of the truck for now, and we'll deal with that later. All right, once you get that jack out of here, you can set the strap off to the side. There are three 13mm bolts. Undo those bolts, pull the bracket out, and then we could take those bolts and reinstall them. Those are the only bolts from what you're removing here that you're just going to reinstall right back in those holes. So all right, once the jack's out of there, like I said, you're going to take the hardware that you removed to get that bracket out of the way and just go ahead and reinstall. All that blue stuff is Loctite. For whatever reason, this guy is locked down with some blue Loctite, but we're going to go ahead and tighten those up. Don't need to be crazy tight. Those could live right back there. Car jack's out of the way. Now what we could do is turn our attention to these now. We're going to work on the C-pillars, but let me get everything cleaned up here and get better light on the C-pillar, and I'll show you how to remove that guy off the ball. Okie dokie. Got everything off the back wall that we needed to get out of the way so we can fit our new stuff. Now what we need to do is get these C-pillars out of the way. First thing we need to do is trace our seatbelt all the way down here, and there's going to be a 13mm bolt right here. We're going to need to undo that. All we need to do is undo the bottom of the seatbelt, and the reason we need to do that is so we can pull the C-pillar completely out of the vehicle, and to do that we need to thread the seatbelt through the opening here. So the easiest way to pull this guy off is to reach in the back, get your fingers around the edge there, and then pull straight towards the inside of the vehicle. I don't want to break the panel, so I need two hands to do this, but that's how you do it. And then there is a retainer clip. So once I get this off the wall a little bit and I can get light in there to show you the retainer clip, I'll show you how to undo that. But then the whole C-pillar itself. A couple things. One, I had to move my floor mat out of the way because in order to get the whole C-pillar off, you actually have to pull off the little sill plate. Super easy. It just pulls straight up. Now we got the bottom end and everything loosened on the C-pillar. So got some light on there I wanted to show you here. I said this thing doesn't come straight off. There's a key thing. So there's this little harness here. Now, in order to get this out, you need to pop it up and twist it. You can see there's teeth going each direction. You basically need to rotate this little guy so it navigates through this bottom sleeve. So the first one, I'm gonna have to twist it 90 degrees to get it out, and then I should be able to undo it and pull it straight out. So it's basically twist, pull, let go, pull it straight out, and then it should release. Then we can feed the seatbelt through and this whole pillar will come off. On the driver's side, slightly more complicated, but not impossible. So on the driver's side, there is this power inverter unit down here, and in order to keep it cool when it's in use, there's an air vent here. So we're gonna use our trim tool to pull this air vent off. That's just push pins holding it on, and then we can do the same exact thing. Unbolt the bottom of the seatbelt, pull the C-pillar off, and then undo the harness up there. All right, one last thing we need to remove before we could start focusing on the back wall here is these studs. So the studs that were used to mount the subwoofer, we no longer need those, and actually these are going to be really bad if we leave them in place because they'll actually pop through the subwoofer. So they're 10mm studs here. So all you got to do is take a 10mm socket, deep socket, get it on there, and loosen it up. And then you should be able to pull this guy out as well as the one over there. And then there's some felt little circle stickers that come in the kit, and I'll show you them in a minute, that go over those holes because we won't need those anymore. All right, so once you remove those two studs, you get 3 felt circle stickers. So you can see one's right there. The other one's gonna go right here on the left of the 2 bolts that you removed to get the amp rack out. The reason why you need to put one on the left one, not on the right one, is we're gonna reuse that right one here. And then way over there, you see the other stud for the subwoofer that also gets those. They're just basically self-adhesive little guys. Pull the backing off and pop it on there. Now, next thing we're gonna do is take our pry tool and we're gonna go ahead and pry these clips off. They're big, long push pin clips. So there's one here and maybe one over there. Once we do that, we should be able to remove the felt lining here from the back wall because we need to modify this guy so we can fit our subwoofer in there. And in order to do that, we need to pull this guy out. All right, so there was 2 push pins. There's one here and there's one right about in the middle here. Once you get those push pins out of the way, this thing is just kind of a floppy mess here. So now what we can do is get this guy pulled out of the vehicle, just navigate it around. Before you do that, look around and make sure you see where this is tucked into. Sometimes it's tucked into certain crevices, which makes putting it back in a lot easier. So once you do that, then we could just slide this guy out. I'll slide it out that way since I get more room over there underneath the seatbelt, and then we can start with modifying this. All right, so now that we got the Fiberboard out of there, we could start looking at our plan for sound deadening. Now, before we could really install our sound deadening material, we got to remove this module and move this module. Basically, we just want to unbolt these guys from the back wall and lift them up. So there's some zip ties in the kit. We're just going to unbolt this guy and zip tie him up to the child safety harness. Same thing with that one. Zip tie him up there. That way we have kind of a clean shot at the back wall. So in this install, I'm going to be using the Amazon Basics sound deadening material. This stuff actually gets surprisingly good reviews, even on a third-party test for another sound deadening material. The Amazon Basics stuff was right up at the top as far as its overall capability. So we're going to use it here. It's also super cost effective. I'll leave a link to this stuff down in the description below. So a couple things. When you are installing your sound deadening, you want to make sure that these vents, so this guy and that guy over there, are open, right? You don't want to cover those up because those are so you can have a cab pressure relief when you're closing doors. If you block those off, your doors won't close and windows will cause a whole bunch of issues. We can cover that guy up for now. We're going to end up cutting it open, but all we're doing is just basically taking our material, laying it up against the wall, sizing up. We'll cut it around these vents and just installing it right between this ledge all the way down to the bottom. Now, one of the reasons I like this stuff is it's 14.5 inches, which is actually the exact height you need from this top ledge all the way down to the bottom. So it's really half the cuts you got to make now. What we're going to do now is get these modules pulled up out of the way. It's just a couple 10mm bolts to get them out of the way, and then go ahead and install. All right, I got about a third of the back wall done with the sound deadening, and it's really pretty easy to install this stuff. This is my first time installing it, so full transparency there. I don't have the roller for it, but I actually found if you take a screwdriver and you put the butt end of it inside of a microfiber, this is plenty of slickness to move everything and get it into place. You can see I'm able to get the contours almost perfect here. So I'm gonna keep going here, and then we should be able to go ahead and reinstall these guys back down here, cut our fiberboard, and then start reinstalling all the subwoofer and amp rack and everything. All right, so before we modify our fiberboard and go ahead and reinstall that, we do got to turn our attention to that hole. If you remember, when we removed our subwoofer, it left a big hole in the back cab. We're going to need to cap that, so I went ahead and cut it out of my sound deadening. We're going to grab our 1087 design panel, and it just pops right in there. And then all you do is take an 1/8 inch drill bit, drill your 6 holes, and then with the supplied hardware, just go ahead and install it. So it is just going through a single layer of sheet metal, so you don't got to get crazy with the drill bit in terms of pushing hard, nor do you got to torque the hell out of these things. This plate already has a little bit of a foam gasket on it that, in conjunction with your sound deadening material, it's going to plug that hole nicely. So let's go ahead and get that guy installed, and then finally we'll turn our attention to modifying that fiberboard. Okay, now it is time to cut the fiberboard to make sure that this is ready to go. Once we install the subwoofer box, then the fiberboard is going to install over on top of it. So, like I was mentioning earlier, you're going to go about 6.5 inches over from the center line of the passenger side push pin hole. Draw an imaginary line down, and you're going to put a little dot right here underneath this lip. We're going to leave this lip in, but this lip is going to be the top edge of that cut. So 6.5 inches over from here. And then on a driver's side push pin hole, we're going to go 2 inches over, come back down to that same lip and mark it there. Then we're going to cut straight down from that edge, right off of our 2-inch mark, straight down. Cut down straight down from our 6.5 inch mark here. And then we're going to follow this edge all the way across and connect those 2 cuts. So then this bottom portion is going to be removed. So let's go ahead and make those cuts. I'll show you what the final product looks like. All right, so the fiberboard has been modified. So again, we went 2 inches over from the driver's side push pin hole, drew a straight line down from that lip, went over to the passenger side. We went 6.5-ish inches down, drew a line there, cut straight, and then cut all along this lip. And then I use scissors to just kind of clean up that foam. So it's a nice clean cut. So now we're going to set this guy aside because we need to go back in the cab. And I accidentally installed these guys too soon. So we need to remove these guys, get them up out of the way still, and then we could go ahead and install our subwoofer. All right, so I went ahead and removed those 2 modules, got them up out of the way, because in order to install the subwoofer box, we need those guys out of the way. But also, in order to install the subwoofer box, we need to run our power and ground back behind the subwoofer so we can route it over to the amp, and so it's tucked out of the way. And in order to do that, we need to install these guys. So basically the route for the wires is going to go right across the top here. After tying into the amp, it's going to come across the top of this little ledge here. It's going to cut down the C pillar, and then it's going to leave the cab right over here. So let's get light on this situation here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these 2 glands, and they're basically, this rounded portion is going to face the outside of the vehicle. So it's going to be on the underside of the vehicle coming in. And we're going to lift up the carpet here, and we got this little flat section, and we're going to drill 2 holes to accommodate, 1 for power and 1 for ground. There is nothing on the other side of these things, so you got a lot of room to play with here. But I believe it's a 7/16 inch hole will accommodate these PG7 glands is what they're called. But ultimately, after you drill them, I already took the screw out there. After you drill that hole, you're going to thread this through from the underside of the vehicle to the inside, and then there's a little plastic bolt that I might have misplaced somewhere that's going to attach to this, and then it's going to give you a nice, here it is, it's going to give you a nice watertight seal. So let's go ahead, and we're going to use a step bit to drill these, but again, we have to run the power and ground wire because we need to run the lengths over here to the amp so that we could go ahead and install the subwoofer. We can't install a subwoofer until those wires are run and zip tied up out of the way. Then we can go back in, install the subwoofer box, install the fiberboard, get these guys back into where they go, and then call it a day in the back here, and then we could turn our attention to the amp. All right, so I got my roughly 7/16 inch holes drilled there. Got a little drywall from my vacuum on there. But both glands are installed. I can get access to them from the bottom. Now what I'm going to do is uncoil my power and ground. And on one side of the wires that they give you from Sounds Good, you got this shrink wrap. This is what you're going to feed through from under the body, and that's what's going to wrap around to your subwoofer. So on both the power and ground, I'm going to feed the weather strip end cut piece through those glands. Once I get it to the length that I want it to, then you go up underneath and you tighten down the gland. That way it pinches down on the wire and gives you a nice weatherproof seal. So, all right, so I have the power and ground run. You can see them popping out of the floorboard there, and I went ahead and ran them up the sidewall here, tucked them back around all the wires in the C-pillar here. Let's get some light there so you can see. So you can see they tuck behind the wires there, and then they just follow the top of the firewall. I stopped them right about there and I have them curled up out of the way. So now what we could do before we reinstall these guys again is now we could drop in the subwoofer box with subwoofers. One thing you want to note, you want to be careful with that stud right there. So there is a ledge on the subwoofer box so it can clear this bracket here. You want to make sure that when you're putting the subwoofer box in, you are pushing that ledge all the way against this spring here. That way you clear that stud, because the subwoofers are down firing right about here. If you go too far to that direction, you're going to pop a subwoofer on that stud. So basically put it in as close as you can over here, still allowing you to clear that bracket, and then as you're slowly lowering it, push it against there so then it holds against that bracket so you can clear that pin there. But with the sound deadening in, our power wires run, we are good to go, and now we can install our subwoofer box. And then after that, we could reinstall these modules, which I'll spare you the details in that guy. And then from there, we can install our Fiberboard. All right, so our subwoofer box is installed. Again, be super careful. It's very heavy. And again, you want to make sure it's as push far to the passenger side as possible so that that far driver's side subwoofer clears that stud, but everything's nice and has tons of clearance. Subwoofer box goes in first, then you can go ahead and reinstall these modules because the wires on this particular one stick out in front of the subwoofer box. There's plenty of room for your rear window actuator, and then like I said, I have my positive and negative ground wires just run there for now. They're ultimately going to end up at the amp right over there, so plenty of wire that's run. Right now I just have coils of wire underneath my truck. I'll worry about that later. That's honestly the easy part. So now the next thing I'm going to do is get our Fiberboard, and we're going to go ahead and reinstall that guy, and then using our two push pins here, get that guy sealed up against the wall. So I think one of the push pins goes right about here, the other one goes up on the other side, and then that should clear everything nicely around the amplifier box, or I'm sorry, the subwoofer box, and then we can install our amplifier, run our final wires, everything here, and then last thing we're going to do is finish up running those power wires, which might be a tomorrow morning project, but we'll see. All right, got our board installed. Everything's looking nice and good. Remember, make sure you keep pulling your wires clear so you have them so you can plug your amplifier in. Also, make sure that the subwoofer wire, where'd it go? Right here, is accessible because this is going to plug into your amplifier. And then make sure that these wires are on the front side of that Fiberboard. Make sure these things don't get in your way. But again, these wires have to be in front because the amplifier goes in front of that Fiberboard. The next thing we're going to do now is transplant our factory amplifier onto the 1087 board. So you already have pre-drilled holes as well as hardware. All we got to do is use, I think, a Torx T25 bit to get the amp off of here. Then a Phillips head to get these guys off and just put our amp on here. And then this guy is almost ready to go to install. Then we got to put in that lower bracket. So let's go ahead and prep this board, get everything ready to go. And then this guy will be ready to throw into the cab of the truck. Super simple. Again, this is all as a result of a really well-designed system. All right, so I have the amplifier relocated onto the board. Now I did lie a little bit. Those holes that were drilled were probably for another amplifier setup that they provide if you buy a different kit. But it was easy enough to drill some holes to fit the factory amplifier. And then on that harness here, it just went ahead and plugged into the brown connector on my amplifier. And then the factory wire is going to plug in here. And then the other two wires are going to plug right back in here. And the reason we have to plug this conversion harness in there is so we can get that amplifier signal out of this amp, send it into the single channel, and then send that out to our subwoofers. So once I did that, then I put the bottom foot on. It's just two Phillips head screws that are already installed on the board, and then you get this little bracket here. Now in order to install this in the truck, where did I put that other bolt? I keep losing bolts. Now in order to install this in the truck, we need to modify one of the factory brackets so that we can bolt this guy to the wall, and then this goes on the bottom. So there's a spacer that goes underneath, just like so. And then this bolt drops through it and goes into an existing hole in the floor. But let me go ahead and show you. Actually, let's just hop in there right now. This bracket here, we're going to have to remove it from the wall because we need to pull this bolt out. This bolt's held on with a retainer. We need to break that retainer so that we could then put this bracket on the wall, put our amp right up against it, and then bolt everything to the wall. All right, so this is the bracket removed from the truck. You can see there's a retainer clip on the back. All we're going to do is just put this guy face down, hit it with a hammer to break that retainer clip. And the reason we need to remove that, let me get my charging cord over here. The reason we need to remove that bolt is because this whole bracket goes inside, it slides inside here, and we need to pull that bolt out so we could thread the bolt first through here, then into the seat bracket, and then into the wall. So let's go ahead and hit that guy with a hammer, and then I'll show you how to install this guy. All right, so this existing hole right here is where the bottom of that amp rack is going to install, and then the other side of it's going to install in the seat bracket that bolts in here. So We're gonna need 2 hands, but everything just kind of drops down into place, and then this spacer goes underneath the foot for this, so it goes underneath this guy when you're bolting it into that bolt. All right, so the amp rack is fully installed. I went ahead and plugged in all my wires here. Again, make sure that the brown wire from the factory harness is plugged into the gray end of that conversion harness, and then the gray end of the conversion harness plugs into your factory amp. Again, that's what gives you your amp, your low signal for your subwoofers. When you're putting in the rack, don't forget to pull your power wires through. I got a little bit of wire here, so we're gonna get those set up so that I could drop them right into the terminals here. Plug in your speaker. So I ran the speaker wire from the subwoofer box behind here, just plugged it right into the amp. It already comes preset up, so you just got to plug those 2 in. And now I'm at the point where I'm just kind of cleaning up everything before I run. Whoop. My light's running out of batteries. So now I'm at the final point where I can just start running all the final and kind of cleaning up everything. So I'm going to zip tie these wires so nothing rattles in here. And then we'll turn our attention to running the rest of the power and ground. If you remember right now, they're coiled up underneath my truck, but I am running out of time here. And I got to run out this evening. So tomorrow morning I'm going to pick up again and I'll run the power and everything. And then we'll finish these terminations so I'm not rushing through everything. So all right, so just a quick stock take before we finish running the power and ground cable as well as the base knob for the amplifier. Went ahead and did all the final terminations for the power and ground here at the amp. You want to make sure this is connected before you go to the battery. You don't want to be messing around with wires that are just kind of dangling around here. So I just did those. There's some heat shrink that comes in the kit. Just go ahead and use that. Trim the wire a little bit so it fits in the terminals here. Then all the wires here on the side, I went ahead and tucked them off. What I could was tucked underneath the amp rack. What I couldn't get underneath the amp rack, I just nicely laid everything out there. And then after I did all the final wire connections and everything, I just went ahead and threw the C-pillars back in. Don't forget on the driver's side, if you have the power unit, to go ahead and add that ducting back in. Again, it's just push pins. The other thing I did is you no longer need the plug for the subwoofer, so that's that green plug. This previously went into the Bang & Olufsen factory subwoofer, so I just went ahead and zip tied it to the carpet there so it's not going to rattle around here. So everything's cleaned up here. We are done in the back here for now, so we're just going to leave everything as is, and then I'm going to go and run the power and ground on the passenger side. Also, when you're running the amplifier, make sure that you snake that base knob wire around. So right now I have that base wire, or I guess the base control knob wire, run underneath these pillars. It's a very thin wire. I'll show you where I ran it to. It's a super thin wire, so it's very easy to run underneath all of these trim panels here without even taking them off. And here's the wire now. After I run the power and ground to the battery, then I'll show you where we're going to install that base knob once I get some light in the cab here, because again, it's early morning and we need to get this project moving forward. All right, so the power is run. It comes out of the floorboard right about there, and then I run it through the chassis of the truck. So if you use fish tape, you could fish it through. Then right about over here, you could get access to behind the fender, the wheel well liner, and you could basically just shoot a fish tape straight up, and you could pop your power and ground right up next to your fuse box here on the left side of it, so on the outmost side of the passenger side. Then I have my power coming up to my battery here, ground comes around, and then ties into a ground here, and we're all good on the power and ground for the amplifier. So one of these days I'm gonna get a distribution block for that. That's getting a little ugly there with my lights and everything else, but we got power, we got ground. I did just test everything. Everything is functioning properly. Now the last thing we need to do before we button up everything is run our base knob. So we need to remove some panels. Let's get some light inside the cab, and I'll show you how we install that base knob so it gives it a nice factory look. Okay, so we have our base knob here, and really what we're looking for is this panel right here. So behind this section of the panel, there's dead space. There's nothing in there. So what we're gonna do is drill a small little hole there, and then we're gonna drop our base knob in there so it gives it a nice factory look. We already have our wires run. They just ran underneath the little trim panels here. I didn't even have to pull them up. The wire's thin enough and it's slippery enough that we could tuck it in underneath there. What I'm going to end up doing is just coiling up the excess behind the dash once I run it to the back of the base knob here. So let's go ahead and remove this trim tab or trim panel here so we could push this panel out, unplug it, get it over by the drill, and drill our hole for our base knob. All right, so here is that panel pushed out. It's super easy to get the side panel out and just push this guy from behind. But you can see there's a ton of space behind there, which is plenty of room for the control board on the base knob to drop in there. So all we're going to do, find a dead center in this little slot here, drill a hole to fit our base knob, pop this guy in there, and then we are done with running the wires and everything. then all we got to do is just run this little wire. I lied. We got to run the little bass knob wire up into the little opening. All right, so the bass knob is installed. Looks good. Looks nice and factory there. So I went ahead and drilled, I think, about a 1/4 inch hole here. Threaded the back end of the bass knob control body through here, then pushed the knob on, gives it a nice, good, clean look. The rest of that control knob wire I just coiled up right here, zip tied up behind the dash and the other wires. So from an installation standpoint, we are done. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up everything, vacuum out the truck, and then we'll do once over, and I'll give you my final thoughts on the quality of the kit once I run it for a day or two. But overall, installation is super simple. Just follow, be patient, follow the instructions, and just kind of take your time when you're doing everything. If you rush things, you're going to break things, but this kit is so well designed, it fits perfect. Just take your time and follow each of the steps here. All right, so let's wrap up this video. Everything is fully installed. Everything's put back together, cleaned up. The kit rocks. So again, I installed this kit because I felt like the factory subwoofer and amp was a little bit lacking, and you could always improve on the factory systems. So the 500 watt single channel amp powering the two 6.5 inch subs out of the ported box was definitely the upgrade that these trucks need. Now, everything fit perfectly. There was absolutely no issues with fitment, and you get what you pay for with this kit. So again, a lot of these newer stereos require a lot more to do in order to accomplish some of the results that we used to do back in the day with just some simple equipment. So Sounds Good Stereo really takes the science out of it and makes it as plug and play as it could possibly be. So if you followed the steps on this one, this install should have been pretty simple, probably taking you 3-4 hours. If you have any questions on the install, definitely leave them down in the comments below. I'll be glad to help you out. But again, the real reason why I installed this is I wanted to take some of the bass out of the door speakers and let a more qualified subwoofer handle that bass while the doors handled the mids and the highs. But so far, I'm very pleased with the performance of this kit, and I like being able to control the subwoofer volume independent of the rest of the speakers. So I took all of the bass, I basically flatted out the bass on the EQ for my factory system, and then I use the bass control knob to increase the volume on the subwoofers so I can get a little bit more fill out of them. But overall, love the product. Absolutely stellar installation. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it. Bye.